This is FEMA really facing its third major disaster relief effort, and we're not done with this season, as Joe just pointed out. So the cost of this and the handling of this with former FEMA Director Michael Brown. Michael, good to have you back. I mean, these are beginning to pile up right now. I know it's technical that people feel that at FEMA it lacks funds, that it lacks the ability to deal with this. They essentially use emergency funding, right?
Yeah, they're going to have to use emergency funding, and this gets back to my whole point about the politicization of the disaster relief fund. When you have a busy natural or man-made disaster season, the disaster relief fund gets depleted very rapidly, and then Congress has this big debate about whether we should raise the debt ceiling, and then they tie in DRF funding with that, not to do it. And at some point, Congress just needs to realize that what they ought to do is what every business does and start creating a reserve fund so that they don't have to have these arguments and these last-minute resolutions to give FEMA the money that it needs to do things. Now, having said that, FEMA's still going to keep doing what it needs to be doing because it can draw on the other departments and agencies to get the assets that they need to do their job. But that's just kind of a sorry way to do business, in my opinion.
You know, Michael, what I don't understand is that now obviously we got a series of storms, even though it's been a largely dormant kind of hurricane season one year after another. I think you'd have to go back a dozen years, and yet now there's this call, whether it's but climate change is alike. I'm not casting aspersions pro or con that way, just to say that we've got to beef up our FEMA's resources, our federal response efforts for what will likely be very common storm seasons like the one we're seeing. What do you think of that?
Oh, I think so. And I know that hurricanes and big floods get a lot of media attention, but even when that doesn't happen, back during this kind of lull between the 2004-2005 hurricane season, which was just as busy as this, and then you get to this year. Well, in that those intervening years, there were still natural disasters occurring all the time. There were wildfires, there were floods, there were tornadoes that wiped out, small towns. So these things go on all of the time, and I just think that what we need to do is figure out a way. Look, for example, without giving away top secret information, we have things like the National Pharmaceutical Stockpile, where we keep a stash of pharmaceuticals to use in cases of emergencies. I think what we ought to do in the case of FEMA is to allow them. Now, they have certain programs that are kind of, I don't want to use the term black ops, but they're just not kind of public kinds of programs. But we need to take those programs that have caches of materials, and we need to expand that. Let me use Puerto Rico as an example. Think of the logistical nightmare now of trying to get additional resources into Puerto Rico and the USVI, because the only way to do that is either by ships, so you have to repair the harbors, or by plane or helicopter, which is very inefficient, helicopters, but by plane. So now you have to make certain that the airports are repaired. So this is going to be a logistical nightmare for FEMA to overcome. If we had caches of supplies in secure locations in places like the USVI, Puerto Rico, Florida, California, Texas, or spread out throughout the Midwest, we wouldn't have to worry about logistics quite as much.
Last dumb question, you've endured many from me over the years, is it when it comes to Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands or whatever, are they equated on the same level with U.S. states? In other words, are they deserving of the same help, the same financial backup from FEMA and other federal sources as a recognized U.S. state?
They are. They absolutely are. Just like Guam. Guam is in the same situation. So think of the logistical nightmare of getting supplies and emergency equipment. Now, we have a military base there, so that's a good place to do the kind of caching that I'm talking about. But if we didn't do that, imagine Guam getting wiped out by a typhoon and now trying to get all the material from Hawaii or California to Guam. I'm just saying, in government, we don't tend to think long-term strategically, and I think this is a good example of why we should do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. By the way, everything you outlined and feared a dozen years ago when everyone was piling on you proved prescient and exactly right. So, Michael, thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Neil.
All right, well, you got to rub that into people. I keep telling you that. Michael Brown, the former FEMA director.